Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com with this week's episode of the Market Monday on a Tuesday, as is tradition here with the channel. So, I want to talk about the Pioneer bans and how the Pioneer metagame is shaping up and some of the financial opportunities that are surrounding this. So, the ban list is really shaking things up. Well, not too terribly, but two of the more oppressive decks with the green ramp as well as the copycat combo have had pieces banned. So, both of those are essentially green ramp is still something you can do. You just have to go a completely more fair route. You can't go the double ley line of abundance in the Ninth Ocean and Nyx and just pump out a turn 2 Nissa, which was happening actually more than you'd think in the Pioneer tournaments. So with those two being banned, especially with the ley line and with Oath of Nissa and with the copycat, we have a better look of what I think the Pioneer metagame is going to be in the short term. However, every week is the opportunity for Wizards of the Coast to ban even more cards, and I think that we are going to go down that road more often than not. Now, 2 of the 5 cards that I called in my top 5 cards that I thought were going to be banned in Pioneer did get banned. I missed the Leyland of Abundance because that was one of the decks that was more of a breakout deck towards the end of the week, not the first of the week when I did my ban list video. But after playing against the deck and watching some of the results, it definitely was the right move to ban something like Leyline or Nykthos Shrine Nyx, and I think that Leyline is the culprit in this case. It's a free mana spell. I've never been a fan of those type of things. They tend to be the most busted or the degenerate ones that get out of hand, and I agreed with Wizards in this case. So it seems that Wizards is on the same wavelength as me. We identified a lot of the same problems, but I still think there's some problems left in the Pioneer format. So speaking of which, I guess it's a good discussion talking about why you shouldn't be investing in the broken cards. I think that looking at even these, you're going to see there'll be some things that come up that are striking with many of these decks. I still think Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise eventually will get banned, and that's why I wouldn't touch any cards that are associated with those two decks, as we don't know how their power level will shape up after those 2 particular cards are banned. And you can even look at things like Oko, Thief of Crowns, or Teferi that have been in the murmurings for cards that also could get banned. Those are other cards and decks surrounding those cards that I would not invest in. Now let me tell you a little bit of a warning here, a little bit of a story. So over the last weekend, we have scheduled a Pioneer tournament here at Gonero Games for this Saturday, and it's created a lot of enthusiasm. And of course, the more competitive players come out of the woodwork when there's a higher prize online. We're giving a free box topper out. It's a free entry tournament, so a free Ultimate Masters box topper as well as other prizes. So I mean, there's no reason not to come play, and it does get more of the competitive people out of the shadows here wanting to play in these type of tournaments, and of course they want to spike it up. And so I did have a customer that did invest or build the copycat combo, and I kind of warned him about it. I said Monday there was a possible ban list, and in my opinion, the Feldar Guardian is high up on that list of cards that could get banned. However, they did not heed my advice, and now today they're quite upset that they invested a couple $100 in a deck that they cannot play. And I want to feel sad, but I mean, and this is sort of the advice I'm going to give to everyone that does play this sort of investing in the meta, investing in the better decks. Warning is if you kind of play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. In this case, going in on investing in the most broken deck into a ban list is just asking for trouble. And again, this person's whole reasoning was not necessarily to make money on the Pioneer, it was to actually play it. But it's still my same philosophy, even as Rogue Deck Builder. I kind of try to shy people away from just building the mainstream deck and try to find other outlets to, compete. There's nothing wrong with net decking, but I always find that even if you want to, play the meta, a lot of times the better thing to do is to play the number 2 deck or the number 3 deck, just as you can expect so many numbers of a certain card, you can kind of play around that. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. The whole point of this is that I would avoid that scenario and not be investing in these particular decks. So if we actually look at the Pioneer League and pull it up, you're going to see some very striking things with the numbers of cards that are being played. So first of all, out of the safe cards that I think are going to be format defining, and they're going to be the lightning bolts of the format, is we're going to see Wild Slash, Fatal Push, and Thoughtseize as the number 1 cards. These are what I consider the format defining check cards. So they're going to keep other decks in check. So banning these particular cards would actually be bad for the format because they'd let other degenerate things run amok if you didn't have ways to keep them in check. So Thoughtseize, for example, is keeping like Jeskai Ascendancy decks in check if you can just rip out a card. Fatal Push is really good against cards like Thing on the Ice. If there wasn't a Fatal Push, Thing on the Ice would be an absolutely just busted card in the format, but a 1-mana spell that can take care of a 2-mana creature that you have to put a lot of investment in is a great answer for a card like that. And then, of course, Wild Slash is just our best alternative to not having Lightning Bolt in the format. It also does have the ability to not have damage be preventable in a turn, which is actually very relevant in this format with many fog-based decks surrounding like Nexus of Fate and Approach the Second Sun. So all of these I think are quite safe. Of course, 2 of them are uncommons. Wild Slash has actually gone up quite a bit in value since the Pioneer format has started to materialize. You can see it's up to $2.50. I believe, just on a side note here, that these are found in the Dragons of Tarkir event deck, which is green-red. I believe there's a full playset in those. So that is actually getting quite interesting now with the Dragons of Tarkir. I used to be able to get those for super cheap. I remember at one time there was a sale from a distributor, and we got them for like just a couple bucks a deck. And we were breaking them apart just for the dice that were in them because you can actually eBay the dice for like $4 or $5, depending on the color. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Now, Wild Slash, I think, is going to continue to be that format staple. I'm still not sure exactly where the Pioneer format is going to settle. I think everything is overinflated, and especially cards from Fate Reforged on commons. I even have a hard time thinking that this will hold true. We see like other vendors like Card Kingdom at $1.50. I think that's more true to the cost of like Fate Reforged. But again, it's still young. There's still people building decks, and you would think that the overall price of cards will continue to go up, but every set in Pioneer just has so much supply. So anyway, same thing with Fatal Push. This has an F&M promo plus a ton of supply out there, but Thoughtseize is the real winner, and I think this is the card that is the safest if you do want to invest in thinking a card might go above the $30 range. However, I still have a rule of thumbs for Pioneer. I believe that if a card was not able at the height of Modern, the height of popularity of Modern, from Pioneer era cards to go up a certain price tag, that I don't see any reason why Pioneer will cause cards to go up above this threshold. So even cards like Thoughtseize now double dip, and I get it. Some people don't like to de-sleeve cards and put them from their Modern deck in their Pioneer deck. Yes, there'll be people who will be playing Pioneer that don't have no interest in Modern. However, I still think the vast majority of demand for Thoughtseize is coming from the Modern format, and so a double up is not very justifiable for this particular card. However, if you are looking for a safe card that I think is quite safe, that doesn't have a chance to being banned, it is these check cards. These are the cards that keep other decks in check. Now, the next group of cards, though, I would be very hesitant to invest in. And this is the Once Upon a Time, Veil of Summer, Teferi Time Raveler, and Smuggler's Copter. All of these are playing a negative role, in my opinion, in the Pioneer format. Smuggler's Copter is kind of having the problem that Birthing Pod or Wild Nacatl had at one point. Now, Wild Nacatl ended up being unbanned because they changed their philosophy for how they wanted the Modern format to have a ban list. At one point, they wanted it to ban cards for diversity's sake, meaning if there's a card that just pushed out other cards and it was just the best card in its slot, hence Wild Nacatl, and there are other cards that are just slightly worse, then they should ban Wild Nacatl for just the diversity's sake of the meta or the options you can use. So that was their theory. Banning Wild Nacatl would see like the Kithkin that leveled up, or the Knight that leveled up, or some other cards that were just slightly worse than Nacatl end up not really happening or not really mattering that much, and they did end up unbanning Wild Nacatl. So Smuggler's Copter, you can kind of make that same argument for that it's being just such a card that is good in every deck. It's great in some decks, but basically good in any deck. If you have any way to enable the Smuggler's Copter, it's probably a throw-in. And I could see that Wizards getting frustrated if Smuggler's Copter does start to have more of the meta share. The thing about Smuggler's Copter is really one of the best vehicle targets for throwing into like Ensoul Artifact, and maybe they want to keep that angle alive in the Pioneer meta. But I could make the argument that Smuggler's Copter should go just for that diversity's sake, just for finding other cards that could go in slots that are being pushed out by Smuggler's Copter. Teferi Time Raveler is a whole different can of worms. I think Teferi Time Raveler becomes a lot more fair without Oath of Nissa. Oath of Nissa leaving that permanent back to then be flickered or bounce back with Teferi was just too good. And Teferi, though, is still backbreaking for control decks to really have a chance in this format. I mean, there are some control decks, but they're on the extreme end of control. Teferi really preys on those control mid-range type strategies, where if you drop that Teferi and then protect that Teferi, and your opponents can no longer cast instant spells, they no longer mean you have to worry about a counter spell happening. And in a control versus control war, that just wins the game if whoever solves the Teferi problem first. So I can see Teferi is another card that could be banned. You can also, this is another card that is seeing a lot of play in Modern and in Legacy. Teferi could just be too good for the format, and I could see this one going. Veil of Summer is just a bad design card because it just does too much for a 1 mana cost card. We like to compare Veil of Summer as the Green's Cryptic Command because you're at least drawing a card and countering a spell out of Veil of Summer, and oftentimes it ends up being a draw card, counter spell, and silence your opponent for the remainder of the turn card, because then your opponents can't cast any other removal-based spells, and it's also a very good stacker. So your opponents have cast a lot of things, maybe you reacted them, and you have the Veil of Summer, and the Veil of Summer goes on top of the stack and counters everything below it because of giving your permanents hexproof at that point. So Veil of Summer, I think, is just too good for the Pioneer format. I think it's actually too good for the Standard format. And typically, I understand having hate cards, especially when I have a powerful card like Thoughtseize in the format. But this one is just too far pushed in one direction, and I think it's bad for the game. I'd actually like to see Veil of Summer banned in all formats, and that's funny coming from a player that doesn't like, blue counter spells and black discard spells. It's not my preferred way of playing Magic. So you'd think that I'd like to have a card like Veil of Summer at my disposal, but think of all the other cards like Shaper's Sanctuary that play a similar role that are never going to see the light of day because Veil of Summer is just a better card to throw in that slot. And so again, I think this card is way too high in the power level, and this is a card that I would not be actively keeping copies of because of the danger of it getting banned. That comes to the biggest offender. Now I'm going to have to show the Once Upon a Time. It's a little bit out of the frame here. Once Upon a Time is just another free card that I think was a bad design card. It actually has more of the meta share in Standard right now and in Modern than it does in the Pioneer format. But I mean, this is an ebb and flow type format. A lot of the lists are coming from these leagues rather than the tournaments, and they did just get rid of some of the decks, the ramp decks, and the kind of the Oko Teferi Copycat decks that also were running Once Upon a Time. And so those got purged from the database here, and we're left with the decks that do run them, and it still is a 21.88% of the meta is running Once Upon a Time. Now, I also think that Once Upon a Time is breaking a bunch of other cards like Treasure Cruise. I threw Treasure Cruise in the stock, Is It Phoenix deck, and it is amazing in the deck. So let me find the one that I was looking at here. So this is the one that I threw the Once Upon a Time in, and it just does too much. So if you actually just go down your land count, and that's literally what Once Upon a Time is good for, to 18 lands and throw out the strategic planning, then you're left with a deck with Once Upon a Time. You barely have to splash any green, and if you end up having to have them in your hand, you can just Charm them away. That's what's so good about this deck, is you have ways to pitch cards through Lightning Axe, Chart of Course, and the Charm. So if you get stuck within your hand, even if you don't even have any green, they're just great pitchable cards that add to the count to the Treasure Cruise. And if you did have one in your opening hand, it just reduces that variance. I think Once Upon a Time is one of those cards where you start with an opening hand of 11 cards rather than 7, because it gives you access to keep a lot worse hands, thinking that you can go and find a Thing in the Ice or a land or an Arclight Phoenix to get it going. And in my opinion, these Is It Phoenix decks will start to adopt that Once Upon a Time strategy. We've seen other decks in Modern follow suit, and there's just too much value out of having a card in your graveyard, a free spell being cast, and the ability to fix the deck. And this deck is also a deck that wants that Thing in the Ice very, very quickly, and being able to tutor that up on turn 1 without having any resources is actually pretty decent. And then later on in the game, it is right on par with something like strategic planning. Instead of looking at the top 3 cards, you're looking at the top 5 cards. They don't go in your graveyard, but you still are getting the important pieces. Remember, the important pieces in this deck are Thing in the Ice and Arclight Phoenix. You need to have that engine going. And if you are struggling to find those cards, it's oftentimes better just to go the route of Once Upon a Time and even missing and not finding them, but filtering through 5 cards to get there. So this card, I think, is just going to end up being too good with the Once Upon a Time. I think that it's definitely ban worthy, and it's another card that I would not be caught dead holding high quantities of this card. So I guess this kind of turned into a little bit of predictions video for like cards that I wouldn't invest in just due to their volatility of being banned. I'm okay with this sort of concept. So going down, we have Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves. I think they're both safe. And then we have Oko Thief of the Crowns also at about 18.75%. And keep in mind, 2 archetypes that did play it, because some of the ramp decks were Splashing Blue for Hydroid Krasis and Oko Thief of the Crowns. And then, of course, the copycat decks, a vast majority of them were running Oko Thief of the Crowns because it did have that same tempo feel that Teferi and Reflector Mage have of setting up the combo. So you drop the Oko, take care of their threats, and then you're in the clear to combo off. So I think Oko Thief of the Crowns is also a card that will eventually be banned in Pioneer. If we go over to some of the more recent tournament finishes here, rather than just leagues, we'll pull up some of these minor ones and then the Pauper Challenge. You can see also there is some good opportunities for cards that I think are under the radar at the moment. So this particular one does not have any sort of breakdown of the cards that were used, so we can expand the decks here. And Hardened Scales to me still seems to be like a card that is undervalued at that $5 range. The reason why Hardened Scales, I think, has the ability to go up to an $8 to $10 range is just how much it sees play in Commander, and it still sees play even in Modern in the Hardened Scales Affinity. So now we have this triple dipping effect where it to me it seems closer to Thoughtseize type value, other than it has had that reprint in Commander, but so is Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize had plenty of reprints in this time being. And if this deck is a deck that it gets adopted in the meta and a lot of people pick it up, I think this is one of the ones that is better to actually invest in. I don't see it getting banned because it is just an enabler card. It's not a broken card in this format. And there are other alternatives like with the Winding Constrictor and the 4-mana one that came out of Gil's Ravnica, but this is the best option for getting it out on turn 1, then getting your other things bigger. I could see a card like Walking Ballista or Hangerback Walker being banned before Hardened Scales. So there's our good old Once Upon a Time there again. It's in every deck that can play it. But this is a good example of a card that I think is sleeping a bit. Experiment 1/2 also seems like it's a bit of a sleeper. We're seeing some stomping, some mono green stompy decks, whether it be in this +1/+1 counters, deck matters decks, as well as in like an aspect of Hydra or Gruul aggro. Experiment 1 is seeing a lot of play right now in the Pioneer format. And yes, it is an uncommon, but we saw the uncommon of Wild Slash go up to $2.50. Experiment 1 is currently under $1. This could easily be one that you could pick up. I think at this day and age, like Pelt Collector probably has similar supply to Experiment 1. Well, probably not. And uncommon out of Gatecrash is still quite common. But this set is getting old enough to where uncommons are being lost, and the supply, I think, will outstretch Experiment 1. A few other cards out of here that I've noticed seeing a lot of play is Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. This one's a little bit more risky because of the reprint in the dual deck. And then we have goodies like Scavenging Ooze that I don't know if I'd invest in Scavenging Ooze because this card just seems to be reprinted like crazy. We have modern sets that are probably going to be coming out again with less restrictions than Modern Horizons had, where it could get a reprint. We have a lot of Commander sets that are going to be printed out. So I don't know about the Scavenging Ooze, the potential investment. But I mean, looking over these lists, you can start to identify a lot of the common cards that are just slower than cards that have already spiked up in value. So we have another Phoenix deck. Phoenix would be a archetype that I wouldn't really hold my breath on either, because a lot of them are on Treasure Cruise. But I also think that if Treasure Cruise gets banned, we do have still the finale of whatever is it, finale of Devastation, the red one, where you can cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. If it's X or less, you can cast an instant and a sorcery. I think that one actually gets quite interesting if we can find a decent alternative to some of these sorceries that do have a heavier cost. So right now there's just a lot of instances in this, but it's easy to manipulate this deck list because there's just so many options to have good options for sorcery speed cards. Something like an Incendiary Flow could easily be in here instead of a Fiery Temper if the Madness is less appealing than actually getting those 3 spells to get to either flip your thing in the ice or get the Arclight Phoenix out. And so I don't think this deck archetype is dead without Treasure Cruise. I still would be hesitant though, because eventually I do believe that Treasure Cruise is going to get the ban. As more cards are printing, the card just gets better and better, and it's been busted in everything that's been printed in, even Pauper. Like people say, oh, fetch lands, fetch lands. Well, this card's banned in Pauper too that doesn't have fetch lands. And eventually the Pioneer format's going to get to the point where you can just chain off a bunch of spells, especially if they keep allowing spells like Once Upon a Time in the format, to where this would be a broken card. So I think this is actually still intact. So you can look at your thing in the ices and Arclight Phoenixes as potential investments, but they're both very, very high right now at this $15 to $20 mark that both Thing in the Ice and Arclight Phoenix are. Mono Green Devotion, this is another one that you can easily find Experiment 1s in this list. This one seems like it's going... Oh, this is the old Leyline Abundance. A lot of them have gone back over to just Stompy. This deck has been banned now, and these are a lot of cards that will come crashing down because of the banning of Leyline Abundance. We should see Nykthos Shredded Nyx come back down to earth. I think that we should see Voracious Hydra. It's with an Oko ban in Standard. This is another card that I don't know if it's something you can actually hold on to and actually make anything. It's probably a sell as well. And even things like Nissa, who shakes the world with an Oko ban in Standard and now with the Leyline Abundance ban in Pioneer, get a lot worse than they once were. Vivian Arkbow Ranger, though, is quite interesting with the Nykthos Shredded Nyx pairing in the Pioneer format. So let's just go over here to the Pioneer Challenge. I think we'll get a better data. You can look at the side here, and you can see also the Oath of Nissa was the most played card, and then it didn't have a lot of copycats in this particular list. However, it does have Once Upon a Time up here highly. It does have Walking Ballista up here highly. That could just be targets for the ban. If we actually expand the deck, though, I do want to talk about a few of these vampire lists. I think that Sorin actually does look a lot more interesting with it. It did go down in price since there's just not enough cards in Standard to really make Sorin viable. I think we're going to see Sorin go back up to $20 mark just because of this Pioneer Challenge alone. I think a lot of these devotion-based decks will figure out that throwing out a Sorin and then throwing out a card for free off of Sorin is a better way of getting devotion for Grey Merchant of Asphodel than a lot of the traditional ways that people are building mono black devotion right now with like Pack Rats and the triple black one that was out of out of the Throne of Eldraine. I think that this is going to be the good one. I mean, look at all these great targets that you can ramp out with Sorin. There's even still the vampire, I believe it's a vampire out of Guilds of Ravnica, or Gatecrash, that is a 6-mana vampire that whenever it hits, don't you mill the top 7 cards? I believe that's a vampire. And I'm wondering if people are going to start to be experimenting around with Sorin with that. The thing about Sorin is I like these cards in like the Pioneer format because these cards get better and better and better as time goes on. And these are the cards you want to identify. Okay, next set's got vampires. Okay, Sorin gets better, inevitably better because of more options. But I think this is already a solid deck, as you can see that nothing being ramped out with Sorin is necessarily bad. So even, and then plussing the giving it Death Touch and Lifelink to a vampire and getting the Knight of the Even Legion online is also something that is pretty decent with Sorin. But if you look at the Great Merchant of Asphodel aspect, it goes Sorin, even throw out something like a Gifted Aetherborn. There's 3 devotion on board for Gary to come down and really drain your opponent. So again, these are the type of things to identify. And we'll have to spend another a whole time analyzing these particular cards from these sets. Or from these results, and see where Pioneer is going to settle here in this week 2 and whatnot. So again, these are the ones that I think are safe, is these enabler type cards, the Hardened Scales of Sorin, Imperious Bloodlords, and I wouldn't be caught dead holding cards like Once Upon a Time or Treasure Cruises, or all the cards that are traditionally more busted and have a higher chance of getting that ban hammer, because I think next Monday 2 will have another ban list. So hope this has been informative. Not really going to go much more into detail on this particular video. All I can say is that I will be hitting this hard on my Rogue Market channel and looking at the results from tournaments, and even though I think that the entire format of Pioneer is overinflated, there's still a lot of opportunity to make out on cards that are just undervalued at the moment. And these are the perfect examples. I love these decks where you still have like a mythic out of Battle for Zendikar that's under the $4 range. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't subscribed to the Rogue Market channel, I highly suggest you do so. If you're into the more Market Monday type videos, that entire channel was birthed because of Market Monday, where I can go more into depth about the specs that I currently spec into, or just the finance related aspects of Magic the Gathering in general. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.